Monsters. That is the only word she can think of as she watches giant creatures crawl around. Four-legged beasts that stand 100 feet tall walk on thick, tree-trunk legs, clawed toes sticking out from all sides of feet that are the size of cars. The monsters' heads are bulbous, with deep black eyes protruding from each side, covered by sharp, scaled ridges. Eyes on each side. Predators have eyes that face front. At least, they normally do. What Dr. Prost sees is far from normal.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and welcome to Kaiju Lit Circle, where I still haven't come up with a good catchphrase yet. Today's Kaiju novel is a bit different from the others in terms of genre, so I won't beat around the bush. Bundle up, everyone. It's time for Kaiju Winter by Jake Bible.
The mother of all natural disasters has befallen the United States of America in the form of a supervolcano beneath Yellowstone National Park. The eruption will affect the entire North American continent, and even on the brink of the event, people are still being evacuated. However, when the blast hits sooner than expected, nothing goes as the experts were predicting. Amongst the cloud of ash that slowly envelops the world is not a flow of magma, but wave after wave of gargantuan monsters straight out of a nightmare. As you can imagine, the struggle to survive a post-apocalyptic landscape just got that much harder.
As I've said several times in my coverage of the Godzilla anime trilogy, apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic kaiju stories are surprisingly rare. I mean, you'd think if anything was guaranteed to bring about the end of the world, it would be a constant barrage of kaiju attacks.
Well, Kaiju Winter is one of those rare examples, giving us the genesis of a post-apocalyptic kaiju world by way of the Yellowstone supervolcano that experts are constantly saying will one day rip the world apart. Yeah, and by 2016, global warming was supposed to have melted all the snow off of Mount Kilimanjaro. You'll forgive me if I suspect the data of not being entirely accurate.
As concepts go, it's a good idea. Does that make for a good execution? Let's take a closer look.
The plot synopsis I gave you earlier is a very, very basic rundown of the overarching story. Heck, it's more accurately described as the setting than the synopsis, because there is a lot, and I mean a lot, going on in Kaiju Winter.
There are multiple stories happening at once, often intertwining in various unexpected ways.
First, you have the expected plot of the scientists at the Yellowstone crater and the government officials trying to come up with a plan. Then you have a family with a mysterious past who don't reach the evacuation boats in time. They are being pursued by an especially creepy man who claims to be a government agent, and his presence winds up splitting the family, the youngest of which falls in with a group of anti-government survivalists out looking for supplies. Along with that, you have a prison bus and its police escort which gets wrecked in the eruption, and they come across a group of kids cornered by some of the smaller kaiju. And to top it all off, you have brief vignettes throughout of soldiers and survivors who encounter the kaiju and don't live to tell anyone about it.
It is quite a bit to keep track of. Fortunately though, Kaiju Winter never feels confusing or unfocused. The stories all interweave somehow by the end, and the few that don't still potentially can in the sequels.
That's not to say the plotting is flawless, mind you. Some parts of Kaiju Winter feel as though they were made up as Bible went along. In particular, the survivalists tend to be a bit inconsistent. No less than 3 times do they put up the stereotypical front of being crazy rednecks, only to say that it's all just an act they were putting on to mess with people, but then by the end it turns out not to be an act for some of them.
There are a couple of stories in here that don't quite feel finished yet, but I'll speak more on that in a moment. Right now, we have the question of how the kaiju themselves fare.
In case the link to the Yellowstone supervolcano didn't give it away, these are definitely kaiju of the natural disaster variety, and they come in all shapes and sizes. What those shapes and sizes are, though, is open to interpretation. I know the cover has a picture of a big black dragon on it, and it looks cool, but nothing like it is described in the story. Even the images I've drawn here are just my own guess, because the details are kept vague. Here's what we do know. The kaiju range from several hundred to several thousand feet tall. They have multi-jointed limbs, long blue tongues, multiple eyes on the sides of their heads, most of them are quadrupedal, and some of them can fly.
That's about as much as I can glean from any point in the book. Also, we have this amusing exchange.
What are they? Kyle whispers as he sees the beasts that stand close to 1,000 feet tall. They look like Godzilla. Boy, you don't know your monster movies if you think that's what Godzilla looks like, Gil says, pointing towards the creatures. Godzilla is thick, with huge haunches and short arms, kinda like a T-Rex that don't work out no more. But with a smaller head, Moss says. Yeah, with a smaller head, Gil says. In proportion to the body, that is. Godzilla is way bigger than a T-Rex, but the proportions are different. But these things? He moves his hand, indicating the distinctive differences as he starts to describe the beasts. That head there, too flat and wide to be like Godzilla, and look at all those horns. Must be like 10 horns on top of that head. Godzilla has scales and ridges, but no horns. Mouth is all wrong too, Moss says. Godzilla has a mouth like you and me, all up front. Them things have a mouth that near wraps all the way around the back of their heads. Too many teeth too, Gil adds. All sticking out and And the arms are too thin and long. Plus, the ugly things have 2 sets of lower legs. Godzilla only has 2 legs. Like it should be, Moss says.
I must admit, I'm on the fence about this choice. On the one hand, it seems like Bible is going for a less is more approach, providing only a few details to fuel the reader's imaginations and allow them to concoct their own kaiju designs.
It could also be argued that some of the kaiju are so darned huge that the tiny humans simply can't take in all of the details at once, and since we're seeing things entirely from their perspectives, the vagueness can be justified in that way.
On the other hand, though, I have to ask where we draw the line when it comes to this approach.
After all, there are entire hordes of kaiju in this book that come in a wide variety of forms, but only getting a few details can make you wonder exactly how similar or how dissimilar they are to each other. Maybe this sort of thing is addressed in the sequels.
And speaking of which, time for me to address the one thing that makes it difficult to form a full opinion on this book. You see, Kaiju Winter was clearly written with the idea that it would have sequels. So as a result, it doesn't quite have a conclusion.
It does reach a stopping point, ending on a cliffhanger which leaves no doubt that things are about to go from bad to worse, but the story clearly isn't done. And that's not just my interpretation. Bible leaves a note at the end of the book which says exactly that. As such, I'm not sure I can really give a full verdict on the experience as a whole until I've read the sequels, Kaiju Storm and Kaiju Inferno, respectively.
I can, however, judge whether or not Kaiju Winter is a good start to the journey. And despite a few bumps, it is. Even with its flaws, I'm very curious to see where the story goes from here. So if you're curious, pick it up and give it a read. Just bear in mind that it's only the beginning. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off. To think I posted this review of the first part of an apocalyptic kaiju trilogy the same week that Godzilla Planet of the Monsters made its global debut. Couldn't have timed that better if I'd planned it that way.